Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. We are just going to wait 1 or 2 minutes before we get started. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining us. My name is Frank van Lerven. I'm a macro fiscal climate expert with the Secretariat of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. I'm based at the World Bank. It's my pleasure to chair today's event. On behalf of the Coalition Secretariat and the co-chairs, I'd like to warmly welcome all of you to this discussion on climate policy packages, the role of ministries of finance in driving effective climate action. Today's event also marks the public launch of the new Helsinki Principle 4 report on climate policy packages, which effectively explores how ministries of finance can design and implement coordinated sets of fiscal and regulatory policies to advance climate and development objectives. This topic is particularly timely as governments navigate economic uncertainty, volatile energy markets, and growing fiscal pressures. Finance ministries are increasingly central to designing policy frameworks that can both drive decarbonization and support economic resilience and growth. We have an excellent panel of speakers today who will help unpack the key findings of the report and reflect the practical role ministries of finance can play in designing effective climate policy packages. And so without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker today, Mr. Leandro Rossi, who is the Netherlands alternate co-chair deputy for the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. He works at the International Affairs Directorate at the Dutch Ministry of Finance. Previously, he was active in EU affairs and climate policy at the Belgian Ministry of Finance. Over to you, Leandro.
Thank you very much, Frank. Appreciate it. Good morning and good afternoon to colleagues joining from different time zones. As Frank said, my name is Leandro Rossi. I'm part of the co-chair team of the Netherlands. And it is really a pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, which the Netherlands has the privilege of co-chairing together with Uganda. As most of you probably know, the Netherlands will remain co-chair until April, at which point we will hand over the co-chairmanship to the co-chair-elect, which is Croatia. So for those who don't know, but I'm sure you all do, surely the coalition brings together 102 member countries and more than 30 institutional and knowledge partners. And what makes us really unique is that, as opposed to many other groups, this group is really finance ministry led. And finance ministries, of course, have a key place in really at the center of economic policy making. And this coalition was created to help these finance ministries to translate climate ambition. There was, we saw a big increase in ambitions over the past 6-7 years, and to translate these ambitions into economic policy and implementation. So we do this by providing finance ministries a platform where ministries can exchange practical experience, learn from their peers, and develop the analytical tools they need to really integrate climate considerations into fiscal and macroeconomic decision making. And very importantly, not only are we finance minister led, the coalition is really member driven, and its root is in country ownership. The members really represent the diverse economic structures and development priorities. But the questions that they face are remarkably similar, as we find out time and time again, doing all these surveys of our membership. They face the same questions. How do we design policies that reduce emissions while supporting growth and development? How do we mobilize finance for the transition? How do we manage the fiscal and economic risks of climate change? And perhaps most importantly, how do we seize the benefits, the opportunities that come with climate action, with regards to transition, resilience, but also mitigation? How can we make sure that this transition can also be used to boost jobs, boost growth, strengthen our competitiveness, and reduce energy insecurity, which is a very actual theme in the past few days, of course, but I don't have to tell you. The coalition's value really lies in equipping finance ministries with the tools, knowledge, but also networks they need to make climate action sound, fiscally responsible, but also politically durable, which is quite hard to achieve, and especially all three at the same time, as you all know. And one of the ways that we do this in the coalition is by working on cross-cutting initiatives that generate both practical insights and also specifically tools that policymakers can use. And today's event is part of that effort, and it really fits into that vein, because we are pleased to convene this discussion on, and I'll read the title, Climate Policy Packages, the Role of Ministries of Finance in Driving Effective Climate Action. Today's event is also the public launch of a new report developed under the Coalition's Helsinki Principle 4 initiative, which is very effectively led by Mads Liebergren from Denmark, which focuses on aligning fiscal policies with climate objectives. And this report that I mentioned, it highlights an important shift in how governments approach climate policy. Because increasingly, the experience shows that there is no single policy instrument that is sufficient to drive the low carbon transition. Instead, governments are focusing on deploying coordinated policy packages. So these are combinations of fiscal, regulatory, and financial measures that all work together to achieve climate, economic, and development objectives. And for ministries of finance, this is particularly important because finance ministries, as I said before, we are uniquely positioned as we sit at the center of government. And that means that we are well positioned to coordinate these coherent policy packages. We have, as finance ministries, we have oversight of fiscal policy, budgeting frameworks, broader economic strategy. We're often deeply involved in all these different initiatives. But the reality is that many of these fiscal levers that we have, either tax policy, subsidies, public investment, but also financial instruments that we can use, they remain still quite underutilized in advancing climate action. And the report that we launched today, it really explores how ministries can design and implement these policy packages more effectively. And it gives an overview of a structured approach to thinking about the combination of these different instruments, how to sequence them, how to model the impacts and the effects they will have, but also at the end, how to evaluate them. And they do that while highlighting the importance of engaging with stakeholders and how to coordinate well across the government, because obviously finance ministries, as powerful as we are, we cannot go alone. We need other ministries to work with us, of course. So today's discussion, we will explore these insights in greater depth and reflect a bit on what they mean for policymakers, particularly for ministries of finance. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Council on Economic Policies, which is one of the coalition's institutional partners, for leading the work on this report, as well as the Ministry of Finance of Denmark and Mads in particular, and the London School of Economics' Grantham Research Institute, of which a number of people are here and were involved in this work, for driving really this analysis and this collaboration behind this work stream. You guys do an amazing job putting together this report. So thank you again for joining us, and I really look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rossi. Very much appreciate all of your talking points. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Mads Dalum Liebergren. Mads is a senior advisor at the Danish Ministry of Finance's Green Policy Center, where he works on EU and international climate policy. And he serves as Denmark's deputy to the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Within the coalition, Mads leads the Helsinki Principle 4 workstream and the Economic Analysis for Green and Resilient Transitions Initiative. This work focuses on strengthening the analytical capacity of finance ministries, developing tools and models that help assess the economic, fiscal, and social implications of the green transition, and ultimately support better informed policy and investment decisions. Mads, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you, Leandro, and great to be here. I'm very pleased with the launch of this report, as it marks another contributions from the coalition into what is now a live debate and cooperation within the ministries of finance in the coalition and our institutional partners on how to improve our capacity to assess the economic impacts of various policies related to climate action, green transition, and building resilience. So I want to highlight here that when we say that this work is led by ministries of finance, it is really something that we strive to do. So this work is driven by a steering group of more than 20 ministries of finance from across the world, from all parts of the world, looking at various different kinds of policy issues. Some face challenges on mitigation, building adaptation, industrial strategy, and we come together with the purpose basically of having a better community to work with on how to build our analytical capabilities. We're also helped by a technical advisory group of many of the key institutional partners of the coalition, but also a wider network of researchers and institutions working on this agenda. This work is also built on a number of individual contributions from coalition members, from ministries of finance across the world, showcasing their experience in building analytical tools, building the capability to use them. Contributions from institutional partners showcasing models and analytical frameworks, and also several other research institutions building on this to provide insights that we can use. And one of the key privileges of working with this is to have both the co-chairs, the steering group, the technical advisory group, and a fantastic team at the Grantham Research Institute at the LSE who are able to pull all of this work together and showcase it to the world. And one of the contributions that we had when we started this was from Patrick Lenard at the Council of Economic Policies, looking at the importance of being able to assess the impacts of multiple policy packages on economic and fiscal and climate measure indicators. And when we saw that, we thought this is really foundational, and it's something that we as the community of ministries of finance face all the time, that we don't have, you could say, the leisure of just working with one policy instrument. It's often several different kinds of policies, several ministries working together to design policies that span multiple objectives, multiple types of instruments, and it's very difficult to have consistent analytical frameworks to assess this. So when we asked Patrick and the team whether they would be up for looking at this, we were lucky that they said yes, and I'm really grateful for the work in driving and leading this and bringing us to where we are today. So first of all, I want to thank Patrick, but also this entire community of colleagues in the coalition and beyond who have made this happen. So really looking forward to the debate and also the insights from coalition colleagues on how these insights can be brought into the real world, because in the end, that's what the coalition is about. So with that, thank you, and over to you, Frank.
Thanks so much, Mads, and thank you again for all your excellent leadership on this workstream. As Mads was suggesting, our next speaker is Patrick Lenard, Senior Associate at the Council on Economic Policies. Prior to joining CEP, Patrick worked for 23 years at the OECD, where he led policy work on macroeconomic policy, productivity, income distribution, healthcare, and climate change. He has also held senior roles at the International Monetary Fund, the European Commission, and the French Treasury. Patrick is the lead author of the report we are launching, and we're very pleased to have him present his key findings today. Patrick, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Matt and Frank, for the kind words. I'm very pleased to present the paper today, which has benefited a lot from all the community. Like was said before, the coalition HP4 has this steering group that has been very helpful. Also, the experts that have been helpful as well. My colleagues at the Council Economic Policy, and as well as the many conversations I had with finance ministries and listening to the webinars, etc. I think what I would like to achieve during this quick presentation is to try to understand why actually so few ministries of finance consider climate to be part of their core mandate. The coalition conducted a survey last year, and only 1/3 of the Ministry of Finance stated that they consider climate to be part of their core mandate. So I'd like to understand, the paper explain why this is so, and I encourage Ministry of Finance to integrate climate more in their core mandate. So I'll explain why the usual hesitation, reluctance, barriers should not be overestimated, and I will go into some practical steps, practical insights on how to move forward. So let's go to the next slide, please. So in the next slide, if we can see it, one barrier for not doing more on climate is the hesitancy regarding carbon taxes. So when the word carbon tax is mentioned, there are issues about political acceptability, distributional concern, etc. But in fact, the Ministry of Finance has many tools apart from the carbon tax that they can use to influence the climate strategy of the country. They can deploy their and change their excise taxes on fuels. They can withdraw fossil fuel subsidy while taking into account social concern. They can grant subsidies to encourage the adoption of green technology. They can invest more in infrastructure like the grid to move forward with green electricity, and they can encourage the private sector to participate as well. So they can do a lot without necessarily going ahead with high carbon taxes. So they can deploy fiscal packages. Now, if we go to the next slide, you will see that Ministry of Finance do not have to do it everything by themselves. They're not alone there. They can work together in coordination with the line ministries, with the local government, with state-owned enterprises. So the many instruments actually can be deployed there. For instance, the Ministry of Energy is going to deploy energy efficiency standards to encourage in the buildings or in factories more energy efficient technologies. Market regulation, like the electricity market regulation, is deployed also to encourage the introduction of renewable electricity. Regulatory incentive as well will encourage like more energy efficient buildings, and mandates, ban and moratorium, for instance, bans on the extension, investment in new coal-fired plants as well can be deployed. So all of that constitute a broad package of measure. And there's been, in recent years, a growing interest in how to put together efficient climate package. So if we go to the next slide, I think an interesting example of a very effective climate package is the EU Green Deal, also called Fit for 55, which is composed of many individual measures that have been brought together in a coherent manner in order to reduce emission. So very quickly, the EU Green Deal has, of course, the carbon market, the ETS, the emission trading system, number one, which is going to be extended to emission trading system number two by bringing under the umbrella of the carbon market sources of emission like transportation and buildings. There's also the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism to reduce carbon leakage, Energy Taxation Directive, an hydrogen ban, etc. So this forms the EU package to reduce greenhouse gas emission. And it's a package that has been put together in a coordinated and coherent manner. So if we go to the next slide, what we've done in the paper is run a model. It's called the Energy Policy Simulator. And we've run the model to see the impact of these policies. So the EU has already reduced its emission by 37% between 1990 and 2024. So it's a considerable reduction of emission. They want to go to 55% reduction compared to 1990 in 2030, so pretty soon. So what you see there is that the measure that I mentioned before work together, they complement each other, they strengthen each other to reduce emission. So the line above is business as usual without the Fit for 55 package. And you have the different components. I'm not going to go through them, but interestingly, some major component has the ETS and ETS2. So it's a form of carbon tax. And the pink line here is the introduction of zero emission mandate for new cars introduced starting from 2025. So it's a combination of pricing signal and non-pricing signal. So let's go to the next slide and to expand that there's been a growing interest for climate packages, multi-instrument packages. And here I mentioned, for instance, the literature brought together by Stefan Algate at the World Bank that has contributed a lot to the coalition, people at the OECD and the academic world. So the literature said that the packages work well, they are highly effective. First, they have to be well coordinated within the institution, and that starts within the Ministry of Finance. For instance, coordinate the tax policy department, the budget management department, the public investment department, the PPP department, the international department, and so on. So coordination starts at home to make sense, to bring coherence inside the ministry. Once that's done, there's a need to coordinate with the other institution, line ministry, subnational government, etc. So there are many ways to do that, and we hear later on from other speakers about it. It's important to choose a measure that strengthen each other, that are well sequenced, and that contribute to long-term development goal as well as social inclusiveness. So let's go to the next slide now and discuss, how in practice Ministry of Finance can support coherent climate packages. The paper has a lot about it. It's a 62-page paper. I'm not going to the detail, but just point to three practical insights that we discussed in the paper. So let's go to the next slide. And the first practical insight there is really to bring coherence in fiscal tools. So as Ministry of Finance, you should ask yourself, if I have a carbon tax and a carbon market, do they complement each other? For instance, a carbon tax should cover some tax bases that are highly elastic to prices, when the ETS should cover a tax base which is less elastic and therefore will be subject to a quantity instrument, which is a cap on carbon emission. As Ministry of Finance, we should look at how our taxes work together. For instance, they have a carbon tax, an excise tax, an ETS. I should mention the VAT as well. When you combine all that, do send the right price signal? For instance, this often results in high taxation on electricity, and that's going to be a barrier to electrification. And if we have clean electricity, that's what we want. Ask yourself also, do I encourage the adoption of clean technology, for instance, electric vehicles or heat pump? Do I recycle the proceeds of the carbon taxes like with a fee-bait? The sequencing of measure, do I have the right sequencing of introducing incentive taxes? And importantly, do I communicate well the future action? Important to communicate ahead so that businesses and households can prepare themselves for future increase in carbon pricing or regulation. Work starts at home in the Ministry of Finance by studying all these questions. Of course, you could say, this is overwhelming, it's too complicated. My institutional capacity is limited. How can I do all that? I don't have the right model. So let's go to the next slide. And what I say there is that, the knowledge gap should not be an excuse for inaction. Of course, you shouldn't wait as a Ministry of Finance to have full knowledge to go ahead. If you wait too long, the fiscal space will be reduced, investors will be deterred. And in fact, you can do a lot, by learning, by doing, launch pilot experiments, see how it works. You can use also carrot and sticks. So launch the carrot first, like tax incentives, subsidies, before the sticks, and that facilitate political acceptability. So, of course, it's important to move ahead, try to avoid making mistakes, but policies are going to be imperfect initially. So let's go to the last slide. And here I highlight the importance of doing evaluation. All governments will make imperfect policy initially, important to evaluate and then correct them. I just give an example here of using microdata in the field of energy efficient home retrofit that are subsidized. And in fact, the micro evaluation that has been done here in Michigan and also in France, they show that the benefit in terms of reducing emission was often 30 or 40% less than expected. So the government went back to the drawing board and improved the policy design. So we can go to the last slide. And to conclude, I would like to encourage the Ministry of Finance really that have not committed climate as part of their core mandate to go ahead, not be stopped by barriers, and adopt the structural approach of not being blocked by knowledge gap, going ahead with imperfect knowledge, and then evaluating and improving policy. With that, Frank, I give the floor back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patrick. And we will be coming back to you with further questions and would love to hear more from you. That was an excellent overview and summary of the recent report with really good and strong examples. Our next speaker is June. I'm going to try and say your last name, June, but please do repeat it yourself. Nyakahuma. June is an economist at the Macroeconomic Policy Department of the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development in Uganda, and is currently seconded to the IMF here in Washington, D.C. Her work focuses on integrating climate considerations into macroeconomic policy, fiscal planning, and green growth strategies. She brings really valuable experience from Uganda on incorporating climate risks into the green transition considerations and into macroeconomic modeling and fiscal frameworks, helping really inform policy and investment decisions. June, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. You got the pronunciation right. June Nyakahuma is my name. So I'll just share broadly Uganda's experience as a Ministry of Finance in our engagement in designing of coordinated climate policies, including collaboration with line ministries. So for Uganda, what's been important for us as a Ministry of Finance and generally as a whole of government in this area is having a robust legal and institutional framework to support coherence in climate action. So this is grounded in a Climate Change Act, which spells out who is responsible for what, and it puts the Ministry of Water and Environment at the heart of climate policy. But then to complement this, there's a tripartite arrangement between the Ministry of Finance, the National Planning Authority, and the Ministry of Water and Environment to further support coherence in climate policy, but also integrate climate action in our long-term planning, as well as budgeting. So just to go a bit in detail for each of these different institutions, for the Ministry of Water and Environment, it leads in climate change action across the whole of government, but also in NDC preparation and sectoral climate strategies. So to complement this and ensure that it's integrated in our long-term planning, the National Development Authority is in charge of developing all long-term planning for the country. So previously, we focused on output-based budgeting, but when we transitioned to program-based budgeting, we have a whole chapter dedicated to climate change in the National Development Plan. So that sort of reinforces the whole of government approach in long-term planning. And when it comes to the Ministry of Finance, we focused on incorporating climate action in our public finance management, fiscal frameworks, and budgeting. So to support this as a Ministry of Finance, we focused on using specific fiscal tools to support our climate goals. And this involves coordination with other agencies. Some of these fiscal tools include taxation tools. We have a fuel tax system. We have also an environmental levy, which is developed in collaboration with the Ministry of Works and Transport, the Revenue Authority. We also have deployed different fiscal policy tools like analysis of fiscal risk from climate change. We currently carry out a long-term fiscal sustainability analysis using a tool that has been supported by the IMF. But more broadly on collaboration and also with external organizations, we have got a lot of support in strengthening our modeling approaches, and these have been employed in different diagnostics still to support the whole of government approach in developing more coherent climate policies. Some of these diagnostics are the Country Climate and Development Report. We used a macro fiscal model that has been developed by the World Bank but tailored to the Ugandan context. We had a climate policy diagnostic and we used a climate policy analysis tool, that's the CPAT. We've also had a climate public investment management assessments, and these have supported developing more climate-proof public investments, and also making sure that investments are screened going forward to make sure that they support our climate objectives. So broadly, that's been our role as a Ministry of Finance. And also, I didn't speak about the Climate Finance Unit, which has also been very central on making sure that we have the frameworks in place to lay the ground to attract climate finance, especially in areas of carbon taxation. We didn't have these frameworks before, but we are currently working on a carbon fiscal framework as to just make sure that we know how much we are going to charge when we start implementing carbon taxation, but also on the use of proceeds as we collect these revenues from the carbon taxes. So broadly, that's our experience from Ministry of Finance. I've tried to summarize it. Yeah. Thank you, Frank. I hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, June. Really appreciate giving the Uganda perspective here and sharing your experience. Our next speaker is Paula Suarez Boitron. I hope I said that correctly, Paula. Paula represents Ecuador on the World Bank's Board of Executive Directors, bringing the perspective of Ecuador's Ministry of Finance to the board. She previously worked at the World Bank for nearly a decade on poverty, inequality, governance, and institutional reform, and earlier served as a Deputy Vice Minister and advisor to Ministers of Economy, Finance, and Energy in Ecuador, where she helped design and implement fiscal and sectoral reforms. Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can indeed, yes.
Okay, great. It's always a joy. Thank you for inviting me, because as Matt was saying in the introduction, I do believe that this is the work. It takes more than a village. It takes probably like a global community to advance in this agenda. So thank you so much for having me today. Yes, I really appreciated the report. Thank you, Patrick, very much for the presentation. There are a lot of elements there that resonate with our experience and with how we have been tackling this mandate of working on climate from a very pragmatic perspective. So I think that one of the things that you said about not having to wait until you have all the pieces of the puzzle to start taking action, that resonated very well with me. I think that in many of the cases, and I'm sure that the ministers in Ecuador will really nod their heads when I say that many times it feels when you're in the Ministry of Finance that you're like flying the plane at the same time that you're fixing it and the plane is falling it, and you're like trying to put some of the parts and navigate the space. And I think, as many of you know, the complexity there, it's really high, but it's also, it forces you to have a very pragmatic approach, right? So from our experience, having a battery of tools there that are ready to deploy, even if they're not perfect, having the coordination mechanisms across the different parts of government, and also first, like within the Ministry of Finance, that's already a challenge, but then also within the other parts of the government, and then understanding the broader structure of the economy and who would win, who would lose. I think that those have been aspects that we have learned along the way that are really important to be combined when thinking about climate action. And we kind of separated, you know, like first, what are the policy levers that we can pull so that we don't have to use the very narrow fiscal space that we have, and then make some policy reforms so that the other actors of the economy start interacting in a way that also produces, you know, like good climate effects outside of the space of the budget. Then the other is looking at the fiscal instruments within the budget. So, you know, like revenues and expenditures, and then having, when you think about the revenues in the Ministry of Finance, a lot of them are coming from the private sector, right? So if the private sector that is not resilient to climate shocks, then in the T+1, that has a lot of effects on the revenue. So like that also has expanded our thinking and expanded the dialogue with other stakeholders, whether it's Congress when they approve the budget, whether it's all the different stakeholders that come to the Ministry of Finance thinking about either subsidies or tax cuts or like instruments that and public investments that would help increase the resilience of their own economies. So I think that that's the other aspect. And then the third one is the internal capacity within the ministry, right? So trying to develop the analytical teams that can focus on the tools, that can tailor the tools to the different realities and also to the political and policy cycles, like the budget and when planning approves an investment and all those little links between the different agencies. Getting staff excited about these possibilities, and also thinking about the tools within the ministry that could be like processes and can also be like, you know, even the models, right, or the Excel sheet that can be used in a very quick way to fit the policy. So there, I think that one of the lessons or in terms of this experience is that the gold standard, that a lot of the things that Patrick mentioned and that the report underscores are like, you know, the North Star. But we can also we have to look at the reality of what are the capacities that we actually have, what is our authorizing environment, and also be ready to take advantage of like windows of opportunities that emerge in terms of getting policy approved or thinking about investments that are key for adaptation or thinking about changes that would increase in our revenues. And there's one last aspect that in our case has played a huge role. Ecuador is a dollarized economy, so the levers that we can pull for policy are very limited. And a lot of the shocks that could be in many cases external, they immediately translate to like real impacts within the economy because we don't have like monetary policy to shield them. And so they probably the role of the fiscal policy and of the Ministry of Finance becomes even more important. So like there are two aspects that have, you know, and understanding them and combining them have been critical for us. And is what is the role of the financial markets and what is the role of the international community in terms of supporting or that making it like increasing the business case for us to take some action. So for example, doing, and maybe later we can talk a lot about it a little bit more, but we recently eliminated fossil fuel subsidies. I guess that now with the price of oil going as high as it is right now, we are thinking about some smoothing mechanisms, but that meant that we really needed the support of the international community to make that happen. So whether it is the IMF or whether it's the World Bank that can come up with like a, you know, at a scale that the government needed, that is very helpful. And now we're also thinking about that as a door for accessing financial markets in a broader way. So there are all these virtual cycles or the good circle between policy reforms and then revenues and that enabling you to access more finance. And I think that a lot of that could be thought about like with the umbrella of climate action. And with that, I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much.
Paula, thank you so much for that excellent intervention from Ecuador's experience. And I should have also said from the beginning that Paula and Ecuador have also been leading our HP3 workstream on and doing a stellar job on reforming fossil fuel subsidies and getting carbon pricing right, among many other things. Thanks so much, Paula, for your intervention. Our next speaker is Temitope Akinyemi. I hope I got that right, Temi. Temitope is Special Advisor to Nigeria's Ministry of Finance and Coordinating Minister of Economy and Climate Finance, and has over 2 decades of experience in development economics, infrastructure, investment, and public-private partnerships across Africa. He was also part of the founding team of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority and has advised on more than 5 billion in infrastructure projects across sectors including energy, water, transport, and manufacturing. Temitope, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and well, sir. Loud and well. Thank you.
So, unfortunately, I'm actually at the presidential villa for an emergency meeting. I just stepped out to take this call. We are, as you know, Nigeria removed the fuel subsidies, and with the war in Iran, the prices are through the roof. We have an emergency meeting to figure out a response to that. So it's well aligned with the conversations today. I hope you don't mind if I turn on my camera because the bandwidth is quite poor here.
It's all good. All good. Please keep going.
So in terms of good morning, afternoon, good evening, everyone. In terms of responding to the presentation, I think Nigeria's situation is a bit similar to that of Uganda. We have a Climate Change Act that basically gives the president coordinating powers for climate action in Nigeria, and the Ministry of Finance plays a very key role in that. But what has become evident to most of the players in Nigeria is that the climate issue is a fiscal issue, especially as it relates to the impacts of physical disasters, physical climate impacts on the fiscal space, the impact on agricultural production. Even though Nigeria is a petrol country with most of our revenues coming from oil and gas, but most of the jobs are provided by agriculture, which are very vulnerable to climate impacts. So it's a big fiscal issue for us. The third thing is we usually experience large impacts on our infrastructure, power supply during this physical climate events. So because of that, we're now having to build climate resilient infrastructure, which is costing us a lot more than it would have without the climate impacts. Then the last thing is basically there is also transition risks with our oil and gas assets. The value seems to fluctuate wildly with the trend for transition. And particularly in the meeting I stepped out of right now, we are thinking about how to basically migrate a lot of our transportation infrastructure to gas as a substitute to oil, and also to electric mobility. This has given the Ministry of Finance wouldn't have been invited to this, but Ministry of Finance now has some level of coordination leverage because of the role it's playing. One other thing that has given the ministry coordination some leverage in the last few years is the advent of carbon finance instruments that have come to the market. Just last week, I hosted GIZ and the EU that are supporting Nigeria to issue its first Euro Green Bond. And this Green Bond is actually coming at a discount to our normal Euro bonds. And because of that, the Ministry of Finance is going to be in a position to coordinate which projects get listed, which projects have access to that funding, and how they are structured. Because of this, the Ministry of Finance is having better leverage in coordinating and influencing what kinds of projects gets done. And I think once the international community begins to put hand in hand and provide these kind of platforms, I think ministries of finance will have more leverage to coordinate from the financial standpoint what gets done and how they get done. And I think all the economies in the world want to grow, but the challenge is getting them to grow sustainably. I think I'll stop there for now. I have a lot to say, but I'll wait to give my input later on. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Temitope. We'll come back to you with a quick question. I just want to turn back to our keynote speaker, Patrick Lenam, as we move into this brief panel discussion. Patrick, very quickly, climate policy is often associated with ministries of environment, climate, or energy. And from your perspective and the findings of the report, what is a distinctive contribution that ministries of finance can make to climate policy? And what does effective engagement from finance ministries look like in practice?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I think that's a very important question. And in a sense, what we just heard from the three colleagues from Ecuador, Uganda, and Nigeria, speak for itself. The ministries of finance have a key contribution to make to the climate strategy of our country. I think the colleague from Nigeria say climate issue is a fiscal issue. So Ministry of Finance have a key role to play. Just three remarks quickly. I think Ministry of Finance not engaging into the climate strategy would be a very big missed opportunity. And this is because the Ministry of Finance are very powerful levers that they can use to drive the low carbon transition. They can use the tax system, which has a very powerful effect. They can also use subsidies to encourage adoption. They can also use social transfer to make the transition more socially inclusive. They can also direct public investment at the right place. They also have oversight of state-owned enterprises, typically in the energy sector. So they can encourage the SOEs to invest at the right place. And the same thing, they collaborate with local government. So the very powerful agency, the Ministry of Finance, they are the center of government and would be a missed opportunity if they are not there. A second remark very quickly is that the Ministry of Finance, they are the custodian of economic growth, resilience, and sustainability. The ultimate responsibility of a Ministry of Finance is to make sure that economic growth keeps on going, that the economy is resilient to shock, and that the fiscal situation and social situation as well is sustainable in the long run. So they need to be involved in the climate strategy because it's an important responsibility that they have. And finally and quickly, the Ministry of Finance care about value for money. They are the custodian of the budget. They want to make sure that the taxpayer resources are used effectively. So it is their responsibility to evaluate that the climate instrument that they deploy themselves and that the overlying ministries, subnational government, SOEs are deploying are used effectively, cost effectively, so to generate value for money. So just to conclude there, the climate transition is not just an environmental project. The climate transition is a very broad development project which bring transformative changes in the economy and where the fiscal tools can play a very important role. So the Ministry of Finance then need to bring coherence, good sequencing, value for money, and make sure that the climate strategy is inclusive and doesn't leave people behind.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Patrick. Let me turn next to Paula. Paula, from Ecuador's recent experience with policies for climate action, I think you already talked about some of the lessons that you would highlight, but in particularly, what role has the Ministry of Finance played in coordinating across government to develop those coherent policy combinations? We'd be really interested in hearing your perspective or anything that you'd like to share or reflect on.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, coordination was and is a permanent challenge, I would say, because sometimes the incentives are not necessarily very, very aligned, right? In the case of the recent reform that you're asking, the fossil fuel subsidy reform, that was critical because, like first, it's a key input for so many sectors of the economy. So Ministry of Production, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Social Welfare, the public companies that produce oil for us and actually import a lot of the fossil fuels, all of them needed to be coordinated and the policy needed to be really aligned. So one of the instruments that we created for that is actually issued a decree. The president issued a decree by which he created, I think that we called it the Committee for Optimization of Energy and Climate or something like that. And under there, all of these ministries were asked to play a role and to kind of like create that early alignment. And that happened way before the design of the policy. And then something that I think is very relevant to this conversation is that these decisions do not happen in a vacuum. Sometimes we think that because the Ministry of Finance has the budget that, like there's the possibility of almost unilaterally to say, okay, this is what makes sense. This is what has more value for money. This is what is important for climate. This is what is important for, social policy or for the development of certain sectors, and that we can just like mix the pieces and have something that makes a lot of sense. But actually, you're going to find a lot of budget lines and programs that are very contradictory, right? So it's not that we necessarily have a very coherent policy package, but that's when I think that this idea of you don't need to be perfect to start having some action is important, and having taking advantage of those little windows to make something happen, even if you have a lot of, 4 other instruments that actually play against this. But I think that otherwise, if we wait for everything to be very coherent, we can actually be paralyzed by a lot of the analysis. So understanding the authorizing environment and having analytical tools that allow us to disaggregate these different sectors so that coordination can actually happen without fear. I think that those are important elements. And I don't want to take a lot of the time, but I'm always very happy to talk about these things because they're so complex and I keep learning about them.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. I think you answered the question very well. June, I just want to turn to you next. Based on the experience of Uganda's Ministry of Finance in supporting coordinated climate policy, what lessons would you draw for other ministries of finance, particularly in similar contexts? But I mean, maybe not just from Uganda's experience, but just generally, you've got a very good bird's eye view of what other countries, particularly in Africa, might be doing that there could be good lessons learned. And what types of economic or fiscal analysis have been or would be most useful to support the Ministry of Finance in making informed decisions?
Thank you, Frank. Just to emphasize that, say, for Uganda and most of Africa, we are really at nascent stages in this area. But lessons that we could draw from elsewhere could be improved alignment with our long-term development goals. It's a big challenge, much as we have the frameworks in place to support integration of climate action into, say, our national development plans. There's still like a missing link between aligning like the NDCs with actual strategies to achieve our climate goals. But back to Patrick's presentation, what I've really picked out that really speaks out to us, especially for Uganda, it's ensuring coherence between sectoral plans and also across policies. He spoke about the CBAM. We've analyzed what the impact this could have on the Ugandan economy, and we find that at this point, maybe we are not so exposed to the impacts of the CBAM on our exports because we don't export those specific categories of exports like iron and steel, and the rest to Europe. However, we have a long-term growth strategy. It's the 10-fold growth strategy, right? And therein is an industrial policy. So if we start thinking about how to incorporate some of these actions, say in our industrial policy, then we are better positioned as and when we get exposed to the impacts of the CBAM. Then the last one would be coherence in fiscal policy tools. I spoke about the tools that we are deploying in Uganda at the moment. For example, we have 4 fiscal tools in the transport sector. An age-based ad valorem environmental levy on imported vehicles. So vehicles that are older than 16 years are taxed more to discourage their importation into the country. Then we have an excise duty on motorcycles. If you've been to Kampala, you've seen how crazy it is with the motorcycles. And then we have a vehicle registration fee and VAT incentives for e-mobility, but this is only on domestically produced e-mobility, say vehicles or motorcycles. So, and then we have a fuel tax system, right? But the pricing is below efficient levels. So you find that for Uganda, because the incentive for e-mobility is on domestically produced vehicles or motorcycles, people will still import older vehicles because it's cheaper than importing, say, an electric vehicle. But going forward, ensuring that these tools complement each other. So we could instead apply the VAT incentive on electric vehicles. So in that case, people won't import older vehicles, which contradict the motivation for the fuel tax system. So you find that these older vehicles use a lot more fuel. So the whole system just doesn't work. So going forward, I think that's one of the areas as Uganda we should try to work on so that these fiscal policy tools can complement each other. Yeah, thank you.
June, excellent. Thank you so much for your intervention there. I just want to check very quickly. Temitope, are you still on the call? If not, then I will hand over to Patrick for one last final word before we say goodbye. All right. I guess Temitope is, like he said, he was in an emergency meeting, so he's had to leave. Patrick, one last question for you. The report mentions that using carrots before sticks can support political acceptability. What circumstances are needed for carrots to be effective, and what examples, whether successful or not, are most instructive?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Indeed, carrots and sticks are discussed in the report. I like to use this metaphor, carrot and sticks, really to convey the message that it's important to find the right balance between the two, right? I don't think climate strategy can be made only of sticks, right? We've tried that before. Being a Frenchman, I witnessed the Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vest riot, because if you only go with sticks, people don't like it, right? And actually, they are good also economic reason for using carrots. So carrots can be tax credit, subsidy incentives, to encourage the adoption of green technology. People don't like to adopt new technology immediately. They might be hesitant. For instance, electric vehicle, they might be what's called range anxiety. So those subsidy incentives, they don't have to be given forever, but they are important to get things started. If you think of an S-shaped adoption curve, initially, it's important to encourage people to adopt new technology. So the sequencing here is important. I think the UK experience with renewable energy is a case in point. The United Kingdom started by subsidizing renewable electricity. That helped to reduce the cost of the so-called levelized cost of electricity. So it helped to reduce the cost of renewable electricity. And when the cost was reduced, then they decided to put a floor on the market price of carbon in their ETS, so to have a more to have a stick there in the carbon market. It's also important, just to conclude there, that in terms of communication, to help people prepare for future tight measures. Businesses make plans over the long term, so they need to be told that in years ahead, they need to prepare for higher taxes on fossil fuel, for instance. So, start with sticks, but start with carrot, but announce the sticks will come later on, so people can prepare for that. Just to conclude, carrots are not an alternative to sticks. We need both. We need incentive, but we need also price signals. But carrot can help to prepare for the tightening of policies in the future.
Wonderful. Great note to end on, that we need both carrots as well as sticks to make climate policy packages politically palpable. Thank you so much, Patrick. And I wanted to thank you, all of our speakers today, Paula, Temitope, June, Mads, Leandro. Very much appreciate your interventions. It was a very rich and insightful discussion. We've just shared on the screen. You should be able to see the QR codes for the reports, and please do get in touch with the coalition or with Patrick if you have any questions or follow-ups. We really tried to highlight the role Ministries of Finance can play in shaping coherent climate policy packages, bringing together fiscal policy, economic analysis, and cross-government coordination. I think that really came through in the discussion today. It's really helped reinforce, I think, some of the strong analytical foundations and informed decision-making, and how we can inform decision-making, particularly as governments navigate complex trade-offs related to fiscal sustainability, investment needs, and economic opportunities in the transition. And I really just wanted to take the moment to thank the Council on Economic Policies for helping with writing the report. Also, big thank you to the Ministry of Finance of Denmark for their leadership in the workstream, and the London School of Economics and the Grantham Research Institute for their leadership in producing and supporting all the outputs and products and activities that we've been seeing recently. So thank you also to everyone who joined us today. We hope the insights from the discussion and the report will really help support Ministries of Finance in advancing effective climate policy packages. Please do share the report with colleagues and help disseminate the word. Thank you, and have a very lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.